Hey, this is Mike Durr, the Kingwood Mortgage Guy, and I am here with our follow-up series on divorce and protecting your credit this week. And I'm pleased to be with Gabe Winslow. Gabe's going to be with us again this week and for a long time, I hope. What we want to do today is we want to kind of drill down a little bit and get into some of the specific things that happen when you're going through a divorce or you're considering divorce. And so hopefully this will be helpful to those that are really particularly looking at protecting their credit. Gabe, how you doing tonight?
Great, glad to be here.
Well, good. What we're going to do is we're going to go through this. This is going to be shorter than the one that we did last week, with at least that's our intention. And what we're trying to do today is just kind of give you some tips and guidelines that will help you alleviate having your credit being destroyed when you're considering or you're getting ready to go through a divorce. And again, it's a tough subject. We're going to handle it as quickly and as best we can. And again, one of the things, if you have any questions about this, both Gabe and I would look forward to your calls. So with that, we'll move on to the next screen. And we are the Kingwood Mortgage Guys. We put up this slide just so that you will have the way to reach us. And of course, I'm Mike Durr, Gabe Winslow on this screen. I guess that would be on my left. And we do most of our business in Houston, but we're both licensed in the state of Texas. And of course, I encourage you to check out kingwoodmortgageguys.com, and then of course you can call 281-348-9899 to catch us. So that's the commercial part, and we'll go to slide number 3. But this is what we're going to cover, and the worst thing that could happen is that you sit down to watch a webinar and the information that you're looking for never gets covered, or it's not what you wanted. So I wanted to alleviate that, and the things that we're going to go over, I'm going to tell you. We're going to talk about a checklist to discuss with an attorney before you potentially go into a divorce, or you actually go to divorce. We're going to talk about what happens to debts if we get divorced. We're going to talk about credit and divorce. I've got another list, 9 tips for dividing credit card debt. And then 5 steps to make a clean cut or clean split. And then finally, how to protect yourself if your spouse doesn't pay. Now, I don't know if there's such thing as divorce humor. I thought this was interesting. As part of the divorce settlement, she got the house and the truck. I delivered the truck this morning. Well, unfortunately, that probably is sometimes how it happens. It's not a happy time. But if you're prepared and you go through it in a very diligent manner, then I think that it can take some of the anxiety and the stress that goes along with splitting up and changing your lifestyle. So that's what we're covering. We hope you stick with us if this is things that you're interested in. Otherwise, I hope you have a great night. But here we go. So a checklist to discuss with your attorney. In this particular checklist, it's about a page and a half long in small type. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to kind of cover the big ones, and I'm going to let Gabe do that, but we want to offer you the checklist and the checklist that we have. So if you want, I'm going to put the number right down at the bottom on that red bar at the bottom of this slide. So you'll have that and call us to get that list. But Gabe, can you go over the checklist that we want to talk that you want to talk before you see your attorney?
Sure, absolutely. And this is not going to apply to every single divorce, obviously. Some people have kids, some people don't, some people have grown kids, some have more or less assets than others. But this is kind of a sort of general thing that most people want to consider. And the first and what we see most important ones with people who have kids is custody and control. What I mean by that control is there's all sorts of stuff that goes along with splitting that up, where you can live, where your kids are going to go to school, when you're going to see them, what joint management custody says, what works for both parties. So that's probably the number one point of contention in most divorces. And that kind of the checklist probably had 20 or 30 things there under that heading. But that's a good thing that you want to think about and you want to have ready with those questions and what's important to you. The next most contentious thing for most people, or the most contentious if you don't have, any children that you're worrying about, is your assets and liabilities. What is a fair and just division of the estate, of the marital estate? And that's what the judge is tasked with trying to decide is what's that fair and just decision? How are those assets going to be split up? Another thing that's important, and this is going to be mentioned in all your divorce decrees, is what happens with the outstanding credit. You get awarded the house, well, you also have to pay for the house. You get awarded the truck, well, you also have to pay for the truck. But what about the student loans? What about the joint credit cards? What about the Fingers furniture account or gallery furniture or something like that? Who's going to take that over? That's something that's dealt with a lot. And then finally, spousal, child support, other miscellaneous income-related things, which might be a source of income to one spouse and an obligation to the other spouse. So it's sort of the main things, and all those are very nuanced, and there's a lot of individual stuff amongst all that you should be prepared to talk to your attorney. And keep in mind, the better prepared you are, the more you've gotten your thoughts together. It's going to do two things. One, it's going to lower your bill probably if you come in ready to talk to your attorney, because it's going to mean you spend less time with your attorney, and it's going to make your outcome of your case hopefully go more to your way of thinking, more to your way of liking, the more you've thought about what's important to me and what's not. So we definitely advise everyone to give it a look at this checklist and call us up, and we can give you a lot more detailed, nuanced list of things that you want to bring into the
Yeah, on this checklist, I'm thinking that when somebody goes through that, what they're going to do is they're going to look at the ones and they're going to identify the things that are important to them.
Sure.
And then just pass on the other things. So it's one of those overall good things. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one. And what happens to debts if we get divorced? And I'm going to work on this one, and my slide there has got a picture of, I forget what that actor's name is, but you're going to pay for this. And that's not the perspective of the attorneys or the judge. That's the view of your creditors, and somebody's going to pay for it. So one of the first things that I say in this one is it depends on the account and who it's solely under. And in some people's marriage, they have separate accounts, and sometimes they have joint accounts. So what you have to do is you have to kind of really determine if you have a joint account or if you're separate on an account, because that's going to probably make a difference. Alternatively, you may not even know that you're on an account, and one of the ways that you can do that, obviously we mentioned this last week, is to pull a credit report. And a credit report's really, you'll hear that over and over again, so we'll get that across. The court may assign all the debt to one of the individuals, and it just depends on what the circumstances are for that. But there'll be joint debt and there'll be individual debt. The creditor is under no obligation to remove you from liability, no matter what the divorce decree says. I mean, if you're married, and particularly in a community property state, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, that is joint debt. I mean, you own the debt and you own the assets equally, if I understand that correctly. So just because the court awards you, or tells the husband or the wife is going to pay this specific debt, if you're on that debt, guess what? The creditor doesn't care what the divorce decree says. So, Gabe, if you would, define Texas community or community property state.
Sure. I'm going to give a real brief definition, and hopefully my property teacher wouldn't cringe too much if you hear me say this, but we're going to try to keep it pretty simple. Essentially, what Texas means being a community property state is, for the most part, any property that you have during the time you're married is both of yours equally, 50-50. And when I say property, that's any asset that comes in the marriage, like if you guys decide to buy a house or a car or furniture or clothes or anything like that. So that would all be, his and hers equally, right? A lot of times what people don't necessarily think of is income. Money is property. So, if I make $100,000 and my wife makes $200,000, not only did I marry up, but I get half of her money and she gets half of my money. All appreciation in assets. So,
well, how about this? You mentioned that. Let's say that the husband makes the $100,000, but the wife stayed home to work and stay with the kids. She's not employed.
Sure.
They would split that the same way.
Split it 50-50, absolutely. And in fact, if you got a spouse that hasn't not been in the workforce, sometimes in Texas that would make them more likely to get alimony, because it's considered, hey, this spouse, sacrifice their career for the good of the family. So we're going to make sure that they get some alimony while they get back in the thick of things, looking for work and trying to build their own career. But also assets that you might have owned yourself that were paid with by community property could convert some of that to community property, and that's pretty important with a house. So if you own your house before you get married, it's your house. And unless you change title to the ownership, that will never change. It'll always be your house, right? But if we move into that house together, even though it was my house before the marriage and I move in, then, we're writing a check for the mortgage. We're writing a check for the property taxes and the insurance. And those are all community funds that are being used to pay off my asset. So, I can't convert community property to my asset without owing back the estate some money from that joint money that was being used. Also, appreciation while you own the asset together. If your house goes from $100,000 to $200,000, and you pay the mortgage down, the spouse is going to have $50,000. Say the spouse is probably going to have 50% ownership, more or less, ballpark, in $150,000, even if that's your house. That was the appreciation minus the contribution made by the community property. So it's hard to separate, and the longer you've been married, the more everything is mine and yours, and we've got to sort it all out together. Two main exceptions on that: gifts. So, like for example, if I give you a diamond ring or a brooch or a necklace or earrings or something like that, then that's yours because I gave you that, your gift. That's separate property. Also, most of the time, inheritance. If you inherit from a family member, that's going to be your sole and separate property. But again, if you improve the property through community funds, then that community property is going to have some claim on that.
I think what's going to happen is that some of the things you mentioned and did for me is I thought of a particular scenario that I want to kind of run past you.
Sure.
And I'm sure that others will also if they watch this. So that was a lot of information, and I think that was really helpful. But what I would suggest is if you have a particular scenario that you are wondering about, call Gabe. I think that he'd be a great resource for that.
Absolutely. Here to help.
Okay, so the next slide is 9 tips on handling credit card debt, and this is right out of an article that I read. And the first thing, this may sound like an odd way to handle credit card debt, but it says if you don't have a credit card in your name, get one right now, because one of the things that's going to happen as you go through this process is you're going to eliminate, or you're going to cut off, or you're going to shut down the accounts that you guys have jointly. And a lot of times, one person has the credit, has the income, they have the credit cards. And if you don't, you probably need to get one or work on it right away. And that's a whole different subject that we talk about on how to get a credit card if you don't have any credit. The next thing, which makes all the sense in the world, is inventory all of your jointly held plastic and then pull a credit report. And you're going to do one thing. You're going to look at the credit report, so that'll identify the debts that are out there. And the next thing you're going to do is you're going to call the credit cards and get current balances. Because what happens when you get a credit report, it's not necessarily the instant that you pull the credit. It's usually from information that was posted. Could be a week, a month, could be a couple months ago. So you'll want to get those balances. And Gabe, I think that what I'm going to let you do is do 4, 5, 6, and 7.
Sure. If possible, sit with the spouse and discuss how to handle the debt. And before you go splitting up responsibilities, keep in mind this is all going to be dealt with and negotiated in the settlement. Don't necessarily chop it up and say, hey, this is going to be my debt, this is going to be your debt, we're going to have our separate credit cards. It's good to have that powder, but it's good to keep that dry if you want to do something later. Don't get out ahead of your divorce attorney and the court and decide that you're going to handle things by yourself, but keep the lines of communication open. Check credit every 3 months to monitor your debt during the divorce process. That's big, especially joint debt. I would say, you're not going to want to run up more debt. So, you might want to talk about things like, hey, we're going to put a freeze on what we're going to do in any of these joint accounts, so it doesn't become more difficult.
This is cheap insurance, is what this is. So.
Right. If you can't sit with your spouse to discuss the debt unless the aid of a mediator or financial planner, a lot of times these situations are just really, 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 really emotional.
And a lot of law.
Having two people involved in the room and something that might be able to get sorted out easily between two disinterested or people, can become a point of contention and cause problems in other areas of the divorce. And remember, you want to protect yourself, you want to protect your assets, you want to protect your children if they're involved, and you want to protect your rights and all this stuff. The best way to do that is not necessarily, getting mad or being angry or not, letting your emotions rule the day. So if you cannot, talk about this with your spouse, that's when you're going to enlist the help of a professional. That's why you're paying them. And then if you're the one who moves out of the house, make sure to notify the credit card companies and all creditors. That's a good one, obviously, because you get like solicitations, you get bills coming your way. You want your stuff delivered to you, and you don't want anyone else having access to,
that's right.
Your neighbor.
It's your private stuff, and you don't want your ex or potential new-to-be ex reading your mail. So that's just common sense. Okay, 9 tips for dividing credit card. Number 8, whatever the resolution is, don't back off of it. Make sure it's implemented. It's one part to talk about what's going to happen. It's another part to actually implement it. And I like my little guy there, credit card debt eliminated. It's important. After you divorce, maintain a credit monitoring service for at least 2 years into the divorce. And again, it's just a cheap form of insurance, and this will save you a big hassle. All right, 5 steps to make a clean split. Gabe, I'm going to let you take these 5.
I like the Gordon Ramsay picture. Shut it down, shut it down. I watched a lot of Gordon. Cut off future charges. We talked about that. You might want to get into a point in time where you don't end up with any more joint debt. You don't want to you don't want to keep digging. Put the shovel down when you're in a hole. Find a way to pay off any joint debt. Again, we talked about that part of the settlement. It's going to be part of the thing that's going to be agreed upon. You don't necessarily need to do that beforehand, but you're going to want to do that as soon as practicable after you split to stop, so that you don't have, your financial future in your ex-spouse's hands.
Yeah.
Look for and shut down any old accounts. You might have that Macy's or Target account or something like that that's been laying around that you don't even use, but it's in there, and you don't want your ex going in there or their new boyfriend or girlfriend or something and charging up in your name afterwards. Transfer the balance if one party agrees to assume a debt rather than taking their word for it. Make a debt over to an individual account using a balance transfer. And you talked earlier about making sure you have your own credit cards. Ideally, in a perfect world, if you got $10,000 in joint debt and each of y'all have $5,000, that you're going to take for the terms of the divorce decree, shut that account down and chop it out and make sure that, you now, congratulations, you each have a $5,000 Visa card in your own name instead of splitting a $10,000 Visa card.
Yeah, that's the perfect world.
Can't always happen that way, but that's the ideal world there. Create backups. Include a provision in settlement agreements labeling a debt as non-dischargeable. This prevents a spouse from filing BK against his obligations, thus leaving you with the creditors to contend with.
See, I thought that was a very good point.
Yeah.
Is that somebody agrees to take the debt and then they file bankruptcy. Well, the creditor is going to go right back to the person that didn't file a bankruptcy.
Sure, and that's why you want to get it out of your name as quickly as possible, and you want to make that break as clean as possible. Keep in mind, you are not responsible for a debt you didn't sign. If it's attached to the asset, they can come get the asset from you, so they can repo the car, they can foreclose on the house, but they can't come after your credit if you didn't sign on that obligation. But if you did sign on that obligation, no agreement you make with the court or with your spouse is going to get you out of the repercussions of being chased down by those creditors if you don't, get that out of your name. That's why we talked about, refinancing the house is so important. That's why we talk about, in maintaining your good credit is so important to get anything you sign your name down out of your name.
Yeah. One thing, and I don't think there's a slide in there about that, but one of the things that happens, if you have a contentious divorce, one of the things that happens is people want to get even, and sometimes they do things that they wouldn't normally do, and a lot of it revolves around running up credit, and
Sure.
It's too easy to do because people kind of take their eye off of it, and they get so caught up in the emotional stuff that's going on that it just gets ugly. So just be aware of that, and do these things that are going to help you avoid those things. All right, how to protect yourself if the ex doesn't pay. Well, all the things that we've given you are things that you can do to protect yourself, and I think particularly that last thing that we just talked about. You can petition the court to enforce the divorce agreement. Now, I don't know how much teeth that has or what that is. What would you say about that, Gabe?
Well, when you sign that agreement before the court, if you don't agree with that if you don't perform according to the terms of this agreement, you could be hauled in for contempt of court. You could have all sorts of penalties and bad things happen. But just because your spouse misbehaved in front of the court does not alleviate your financial responsibility to pay any debt that you signed on, and that's what we talked about. So if your spouse is assigned the joint debt and it's still in your name, you're in trouble if she doesn't pay it. I mean, you're not in trouble with the courts. She might be in more trouble than you, but it's going to negatively impact your credit. And if it goes to a judgment, they're going to be able to come after you for a judgment as well.
I think this next one's yours also, and I thought this was an interesting quote out of the article. Filing bankruptcy is many times a product of divorce, and sometimes divorce is a product of a bankruptcy.
Sure, it costs more money to operate I guess actually start with the converse of that. I think the number one cause of divorce in America is financial problems. I've heard that a couple million times on the radio listening to Dave Ramsey anyway. So a lot of times, that those financial problems create stresses and impacts that lead to other marital fights and spill over, and you end up getting divorced. But when you get a divorce, all of a sudden you're operating two households instead of one. Your income probably isn't going up a whole heck of a lot. Maybe it goes up a little bit as the spouse might have stayed at home or had extra child care responsibilities, has to get back in the workforce. But, your income's not rising as quickly as your expenses, Now all of a sudden you have to have two houses, two electric bills, two insurances, extra food budget, everything gets more expensive, and your total household income didn't grow.
Right.
And now you're trying to operate two households out of that same income, and it just doesn't work. The math doesn't work a lot of times, or if it does, it takes a little while for the math to work, and there's a lot of bad stuff that happens along the way. So the more prepared you can be, the less of a shock it can be to your system. Hopefully, the better you can get through this, and we've got some ways we can help you with that, and some things to think about and take care of, and we'd love to help you with that.
Yeah. The next one is the one I think is the best solution to all this, if it's at all possible, is the best divorce debt is no debt. Debt just adds complexity to the whole process, and if you don't have much debt, or the less debt, the less complex it's going to be. And then if you have vehicles or anything that would be secured by a loan, we can refinance those, or I say we can refinance the house. We can't refinance the cars, but there's a lot of people that would look forward to doing that kind of stuff.
Mike, if I could jump in there real quick.
Sure.
Another thing you want to think about perhaps is on a house, if you got some equity in your house, you can use that equity. You can do a cash out refinance. We talked about OLT liens a little bit last week, and that's great for people just trying to pay off equity in the house, but use that equity to pay off the joint credit card debts, to pay off the joint truck debt or the joint car debt. Use that house, use that asset as a way to get free and clear of your debts, because one, it's going to simplify your life, and you're not going to have any of these issues, all these horrors that we talked about. And two, it's also going to make it a lot easier for you to make your minimum ongoing payments on everything.
Yeah, that's a great point.
You know, if you roll $20,000 of credit card debt in the house, you're financing that over 15 or 30 years on the house. That's going to have like $50 to your payment or $100 to your payment, something like that. Versus, you know, hey, $20,000 in credit card and truck debt. I mean, that might drown a person. That might be $1,000 extra bucks. You know,
could easily.
So yeah, you can simplify your life and you can keep your payments lower and give yourself a fighting chance to sort of figure out where you're going to go with your household income as you're now operating 2 houses instead of 1.
Yeah.
So it's something that we can really help people with above and beyond just the simplification.
No, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, so that's really what we're going to cover tonight. And this is what we went over. Checklist to discuss with your attorney. Call us on that one. What happens to debts if we get divorced? Credit and divorce. And 9 tips for dividing credit card debt. 5 steps to make a clean split. And then finally, how to protect yourself if your ex doesn't pay. And then this slide I just wanted to put in there. I want to get married once. I don't want any divorce. I don't want any cheating. Just the 2 of us till the end. And I think that that's the way God wants it. So final thing is that we're going to always come back and say that we are the Kingwood Mortgage guys, and we'd love to help you with any of your real estate financing issues or opportunities that you have. Again, Gabe, we feel so fortunate that Gabe has come and joined us, and I think he just adds and is already in just the last week or so provided a lot of value to our organization, and we just look forward to working with him, and we look forward to working with you too. So Gabe, go ahead.
It's nice of you to say. Thanks a lot, Mike. And again, we just want to be a resource for you. We want to help people out. We're doing divorce the last couple of weeks. We're going to move on to some other subject materials, but we want to put together a good team of people that we can use to help you out as you go through different life situations. And it might not be anything to do with the house. It might just be like, hey, call us and we can give you an idea of what to look for. We can give you an idea of who to talk to. You know, we've both got a lot of years in putting together resources and networks and people and stuff like that, and we'd love to help you in any way we can.
All right, with that being said, we are signing off. Again, thank you for taking the time to watch this. We look forward to you. Make sure you subscribe to our channel, thehomebuyerwebby.com, and or on YouTube, and love to see you on Kingwood Mortgage guys, and better than that, we'd love to hear from you. So call us, 281-348-9899. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.